Get out of the car, now. The officer's voice was sharp, cutting through the humid summer air like a blade. She gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding, trying to keep her composure. I don't understand. What's the problem? Her voice trembled, but she held her ground. The officer's eyes burned with hostility. You heard me. Step out of the car before I drag you out myself. Her pulse quickened. She had done nothing wrong. She was parked legally, the registration was clean, and yet here she was, cornered, humiliated, and unsure of what would happen next. The parking lot outside the mall was crowded, eyes turning toward the commotion. Phones were out, recording. But no one stepped in. License and registration. The officer barked again, slamming his hand on the roof of her car. Why? What's the reason for this? You don't get to question me, he snapped, yanking open the door. Out. Now. Before she could even react, he grabbed her arm and pulled. She stumbled out, her knee scraping against the asphalt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Is that really necessary? Someone shouted, but the officer didn't flinch. He shoved her back against the car, his hand pressing her shoulder hard. Stay right there. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just force, it was fury. Fury aimed at her for no reason other than what she looked like. You can't do this, she hissed, trying to pull free. Oh, I can do whatever I damn well please, he said, and before she knew it, his boot connected with her leg, sending her down to one knee. Tears burned her eyes, not from pain, but from rage. She looked up at him, her voice low but steady. You don't know who I am. The officer smirked. I don't care who you are. But he should have. Because she wasn't just any woman, she was an agent of the FBI, and she knew the law better than he ever would. The crowd whispered, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Phones kept recording, capturing every brutal second. And as the officer's radio crackled, calling him away, he shot her one last glare before turning his back. She didn't move. Not yet. Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Her fingers clenched into fists as she stood, brushing off the dirt. She wasn't broken. Not even close. But the question lingered in the air, how far would this officer go to cover up what he had just done? And more importantly, what would she do to make sure he never did it again? At Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against racism, discrimination, and injustice in any form. We believe in equality, respect, and accountability, and our stories are crafted to inspire, empower, and spark conversations that matter. To our Black viewers, your voice, your strength, and your experiences matter deeply. This story is dedicated to shedding light on injustice and celebrating resilience. We hope you enjoy this gripping story and find strength in its message. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to support our work. Now, sit back and get ready for an emotional roller coaster. Enjoy the story. The parking lot stretched endlessly beneath the burning August sun. Shimmering waves of heat rose from the asphalt, and the buzz of traffic hummed faintly in the distance. It was a typical Saturday afternoon at the Westview Mall, where families strolled with shopping bags, teenagers laughed by the food court, and parents corralled their restless kids near the fountain. But for Maya Bennett, this was just another quick errand before heading home. She had a strict routine, organized, methodical, and efficient. Maya was the kind of woman who noticed details most people missed. At 32, she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence that often made people mistake her for someone unapproachable. But Maya wasn't cold, she was calculated. Years in law enforcement had taught her the importance of composure. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches with toned arms and sharp eyes, she had the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. Her skin, a rich espresso tone, glowed under the sun, but it wasn't just her appearance that drew attention, it was the way she moved. Controlled. Purposeful. Always in command. What most people didn't know, what no one in this parking lot could guess, was that Maya Bennett wasn't just an ordinary woman running errands. She was an FBI agent. Trained. Skilled. Dangerous, if necessary. And yet, even with years of experience dealing with criminals and interrogations, nothing had prepared her for this moment, the kind of moment that stripped away control and replaced it with raw, boiling anger. The day had started normally enough. Maya had left her apartment early that morning, her duffel bag still sitting in the trunk from an early gym session. She lived alone, but not by preference, by necessity. Relationships required vulnerability, and vulnerability had never been an option for someone in her line of work. She preferred solitude anyway. It gave her clarity. Westview Mall was a 15-minute drive from her condo, and she didn't expect to spend more than 20 minutes there. In and out, just grabbing a gift for her nephew's birthday. The kind of simple task that didn't require much thought. She parked near the entrance and stepped out, locking her car with a chirp. Her mind was already racing through the list of things she needed to get done before Monday morning. She noticed the police cruiser the moment she stepped out of the car. It wasn't unusual to see officers patrolling crowded parking lots, especially in areas prone to car break-ins. But something about the way the cop leaned against the vehicle set off alarms in her head. He wasn't scanning the lot. He was watching people, watching her. Maya brushed it off at first, reminding herself that paranoia was part of the job. She walked briskly toward the entrance, her steps measured and deliberate. But before she reached the door, she heard the voice. "Hey! Stop right there." Her body reacted before her mind could process the words. She turned slowly, instinctively placing her hands where they could be seen. Years of training kicked in, but this time, it felt different. This wasn't a tactical situation. This wasn't a suspect trying to run. This was her, and she wasn't the suspect. The officer approached, his stride heavy and authoritative. Officer Ryan Keller was the kind of cop who thrived on power. Broad-shouldered and thick-necked, he walked like he owned every inch of pavement beneath his feet. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but Maya could feel his stare drilling into her. "You can't park there," he said, nodding toward her car. Maya's brows furrowed. "Excuse me? You're parked in a restricted zone." She glanced back at her car. The spot was perfectly legal, marked with a clearly visible white line and no signs prohibiting parking. She turned back to him, keeping her voice steady. "No, I'm not." Keller's jaw tightened. "Don't argue with me. Move the car or I'll have it towed." Maya's pulse quickened. She could feel the tension thickening between them, but she wasn't about to back down. "With all due respect, officer, I'm not breaking any laws." His lips curled into a smirk. "You think you're smarter than me? Is that it?" Maya bit her tongue. She'd dealt with men like this before, officers who treated their badges like weapons and their authority as shields. But this time, she wasn't on duty. She was just another black woman trying to shop in peace. And Keller saw her exactly as he wanted to see her. The crowd had started to gather by then. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the onlookers, but no one stepped forward. No one ever did. "Step out of the car," Keller ordered. Maya's voice remained calm. "I'm not in my car." "Don't get smart with me," he barked, taking a step closer. She didn't flinch. "What's this really about?" "It's about you following orders," he snapped. And then it happened, the shove. Quick. Aggressive. Completely unnecessary. Maya stumbled back, catching herself before she fell. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Her chest tightened, heat rising to her face. "Hands on the hood," Keller growled. Maya's fists clenched at her sides. "I don't think so." He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she gritted her teeth. She could have fought back. She could have dropped him in seconds. But she didn't. Not yet. Stop resisting, he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Resisting? She wasn't resisting, she was breathing. Existing. And for Keller, that was enough. The boot came next, a sharp kick to the back of her knee that forced her down. The world tilted for a moment as she hit the ground, her palms scraping against the asphalt. She felt the sting but refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Stay down, Keller ordered, towering over her. Maya lifted her head slowly, her eyes locking onto his. And in that moment, something shifted. The humiliation burned, but so did something else, determination. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she was capable of. But he was about to find out. The crowd buzzed with energy, phones held high, recording every second. Maya could already see how this would play out in the media, how the narrative would twist and turn. But what Keller didn't realize, what no one here knew, was that Maya wasn't going to let this end the way he wanted. The question lingered in the air like smoke. What happens when the woman you try to break turns out to be the one who can destroy you? Maya's legs felt stiff as she sat on the edge of her bed later that evening, staring at the faint red marks circling her wrists. The metal of the handcuffs had left imprints, temporary scars to match the ones simmering beneath her skin. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, another notification from the precinct's internal database. She ignored it. For now. The silence in her apartment was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Her jacket hung neatly over the back of a chair, the badge inside its inner pocket practically burning a hole through the fabric. Her fists clenched. She'd let him win, at least for now. And that thought made her stomach churn. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, strong but shaken. She hated that. Hated feeling powerless. And yet, the image of Keller's smug grin lingered, replaying in her mind like a broken record. A sharp knock at the door snapped her out of it. She crossed the room quickly, her heartbeat picking up speed. When she opened it, Agent Samuel Price stood there, his broad frame filling the doorway. His suit was sharp, but his eyes were softer than usual. "Thought you might need this," he said, holding up a brown paper bag. Maya stepped aside, letting him in without a word. Price had been her partner for 2 years, long enough to know when she needed space and when she needed someone to force their way in. "I'm fine," she said, shutting the door. "No, you're not." He set the bag on the counter. "You didn't call." "Because I didn't need to." Price raised an eyebrow. "You're covered in bruises, and your car's impounded. What part of that screams fine to you?" Maya exhaled slowly. She hadn't told him everything yet, just the basics. But Price knew there was more. There always was. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You're not going to let this slide?" "No, good." Maya's head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me." Price's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "I've seen too many guys like Keller get away with this crap. And I know you, this isn't something you walk away from." Maya studied him carefully, searching for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. "This isn't just about me," she said. "I know." Maya finally sat down, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I need to do this right. If I push too hard, too fast, it backfires. And then he wins." Price pulled up a chair, sitting across from her. "What's the plan?" Her eyes flicked toward her phone. "First, I need information. Keller's record, his reports, his history. Everything. You know it won't be clean." "No," she agreed. "But I need to see just how dirty it is." By the time Price left, the paper bag sat untouched on the counter, and Maya was back at her desk, the glow of the computer screen reflecting off her eyes. She combed through records, piecing together a pattern that became clearer with every click. Keller wasn't just a bad cop. He was a dangerous one. Excessive force complaints. Suspensions. Investigations that mysteriously disappeared. And still, he kept his badge. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as the weight of it sank in. This wasn't going to be easy. But Maya wasn't looking for easy. She was looking for justice. The next morning, she was back in the precinct, this time in civilian clothes. Her FBI badge stayed tucked away. She wanted Keller to see her exactly as he had before. "Can I help you?" The desk clerk barely looked up. "I need to speak with Officer Keller," Maya said, her tone even. The clerk's eyes flicked toward her, recognition sparking. "About what?" Maya didn't blink. "Personal business." The clerk hesitated but eventually nodded toward the hallway. "He's in the break room." Maya made her way down the hall, her footsteps echoing softly. When she reached the door, she paused, steadying her breath before pushing it open. Keller was sitting at the table, laughing with another officer. The moment he saw her, the smile vanished. "You have some nerve showing up here," he said, standing. Maya didn't flinch. "And you have a lot to answer for." The room fell silent. The other officer glanced nervously between them before slipping out. "You think you can intimidate me?" Keller's voice was low, almost a growl. "No," Maya said, stepping closer. "But I think you're scared." Keller's jaw tightened. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Maya shot back. "And I know what you did yesterday wasn't the first time." Keller took a step toward her, but Maya didn't move. "Careful," she warned. "You lay a hand on me again, and it won't just be my word against yours." His eyes narrowed. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" "They don't need to." Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "I have the footage." For the first time, Keller hesitated. It was brief, but Maya caught it. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She tilted her head. "Or are you finally realizing how badly you screwed up?" Keller's chest rose and fell quickly. "You don't want to do this." Maya's voice dropped. "Oh, but I do." She turned and walked out, leaving him standing there. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't stop. Not until she was back outside, the fresh air hitting her like a slap. This wasn't over, not yet. But Keller had just learned what Maya already knew. She wasn't going to stop until the truth came out. And now, Keller had everything to lose. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the narrow hallways. Maya walked with measured steps, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Every corner felt heavier, every glance from passing officers more pointed. She could feel their eyes tracking her, some curious, others nervous. But she kept her focus locked ahead. Today wasn't about nerves. Today was about ending this. Inside the small interrogation room, Keller sat with his arms crossed, his uniform crisp but his demeanor unraveling. The tension in his shoulders betrayed the bravado he'd been clinging to for days. He glanced up when she entered, masking his unease behind a smirk. "Back for round two?" His voice dripped with arrogance, but there was a crack in it, a slight tremor that Maya didn't miss. She closed the door behind her, letting the lock click into place. "You could say that." Keller leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her for weakness. "You're wasting your time. Whatever stunt you think you're pulling. It's not gonna stick." Maya tossed a file onto the table, its contents spilling out, a stack of reports, photos, and statements that painted a damning picture. Keller's smirk faltered. "That look familiar?" she asked, her tone steady but sharp. Keller snatched up one of the papers, his eyes narrowing as he skimmed it. "This is crap," he muttered, tossing it back down. "You don't have anything solid." "Oh, I do," Maya said, stepping closer. Those are witness statements from people you've harassed, threatened, and assaulted. But you already know that, don't you? Because this isn't your first time. He opened his mouth to protest, but Maya cut him off. And it won't be your last unless someone stops you. She leaned in, her voice dropping. Guess what? That someone is me. Keller's jaw tensed. You think you can take me down? You think your badge makes you invincible? Maya didn't blink. No. But it makes me dangerous. For the first time, Keller looked uncertain. His eyes darted toward the door, but Maya didn't give him a chance to move. I know about the falsified reports, she continued, her voice tightening. The missing evidence. The arrests that went nowhere because you buried the truth. I know about the deals you cut with criminals to keep your pockets full. His head snapped up. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive, setting it on the table. This? It's everything you've worked so hard to hide. Financial records, surveillance footage, internal memos, your entire career boiled down to lies and cover-ups. And now it's all in my hands. Keller's confidence shattered. He lunged forward, slamming his fists on the table. You're bluffing. Maya didn't flinch. She folded her arms and stared him down. You really want to test me? Go ahead. Or maybe you should think about how quickly this drive could end up on every news station in the country. His breath came fast and shallow, the realization sinking in. What do you want? Maya stepped back, letting him feel the weight of her silence. She watched him squirm, the fear creeping in. I want you to face what you've done, she said finally. No more hiding behind that badge. Keller's face twisted with anger, but there was something else now, panic. He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. You think this ends with me? You think I'm the only one who's dirty in this department? You're opening a door you can't close. Maya's voice sharpened. Then let it swing wide open. Keller turned, desperation flickering in his eyes. I can fix this, he said quickly. Whatever you think you have, I can make it go away. You don't get it, do you? Maya snapped. This isn't about fixing anything. This is about accountability. He slammed his fist against the wall. You're gonna ruin my life. Maya stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with fire. You ruined your own life the moment you decided people like me didn't deserve respect. Keller sank into the chair, his head in his hands. For the first time, he looked small. Weak. The door opened suddenly, and Price stepped in, his face unreadable. It's time. Maya nodded, her eyes never leaving Keller. You should get comfortable, she said quietly. It's going to be a long ride from here. Keller's gaze darted between them, his confidence completely shattered. This isn't over, he muttered. Maya leaned down, her voice a razor's edge. Oh, it is. As she walked out of the room, the weight in her chest lifted slightly. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But Keller's world had just started to crumble. And for the first time in days, Maya felt something close to satisfaction. Outside the interrogation room, Price fell into step beside her. You sure about this? Absolutely, Maya replied. Price nodded, but there was tension in his eyes. Then let's see how far this goes. Maya didn't hesitate. She was ready. But as they moved through the hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that Keller wasn't the only one watching her now. Keller's fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was no longer the arrogant cop Maya had faced days ago. Now, he was cornered, his eyes darting wildly between Maya and Price as though searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The sweat on his forehead glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, and for the first time, Maya saw fear in his expression, the kind of fear that comes from realizing the walls are closing in. You don't have to do this, Keller said, his voice breaking slightly as he leaned forward. Listen, Maya. You're upset, I get it. I crossed a line. But we can fix this. Maya's jaw tightened. You don't get to say my name like that. Keller froze. You don't get to act like this is personal, she continued, her voice sharp but controlled. This isn't about my feelings, Keller. This is about you thinking you could treat people like garbage and walk away clean every time. He shot up from his chair so fast that it scraped against the tile floor, but Price immediately stepped in, planting a firm hand on Keller's chest. Sit down, Price ordered, his voice low but commanding. Keller hesitated for a moment before dropping back into his chair. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, Maya shot back. And so do you. That's why you're sweating, Keller. That's why you're shaking. Because for the first time, you're not the one in control. Keller's eyes flared with anger. You think I'm scared of you? Maya leaned in, resting her hands flat on the table. I don't think, I know. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by Keller's heavy breathing. Maya could feel the weight of his panic pressing against the walls, and she let it sit there for a moment before speaking again. You've spent years getting away with this, she said quietly. Years making people feel powerless. But not this time. Keller's voice cracked as he pointed a finger at her. You don't know what it's like. You sit there acting like you're better than me, but you don't know what it's like to be in this uniform, to have everyone look at you like you're the bad guy before you even open your mouth. Maya's eyes narrowed. You mean the way you looked at me? Keller flinched, but Maya didn't stop. I know exactly what it's like to be judged before I even speak. I know what it's like to have people assume I don't belong in my own skin. She straightened, her voice steady. But the difference between us, Keller, is that I don't take that out on the people I'm supposed to protect. Keller's shoulders slumped. You don't get it. No, Maya snapped. You don't get it. You think this is about one bad day? One mistake? This isn't about the parking lot, Keller. This is about every time you abused your power and expected no one to stop you. Well, I'm here. And I'm stopping you. Keller's desperation cracked through his voice. Please, he said, his tone softening. You don't know what they'll do to me. Maya's lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. What they'll do to you? She leaned in. I guess now you finally understand how the people you bullied felt. Maybe you'll spend the rest of your life wondering who's coming for you next. Keller opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked past Maya, his eyes locking onto Price. You can stop this, Keller said, pleading. You can stop her. Price didn't even blink. Why would I do that? Because you're a cop. Keller's voice cracked. You know what it's like out there. Price folded his arms. You're right. I do. I know what it's like to put this uniform on every day and hope to God I don't run into someone like you. Keller's breath hitched. Price continued. You make us all look bad. You destroy the trust we work so damn hard to build. And you know what? I'm tired of cleaning up after guys like you. Keller shook his head. You don't understand, no, Price interrupted. You don't understand. You didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it. And now you're out of time. Keller's head dropped into his hands. What do you want from me? Maya stepped back, her voice cold and sharp. We already have everything we need. You're done, Keller. It's over. He looked up, his eyes glassy. So that's it? You're just going to let them tear my life apart? Maya's face hardened. You tore it apart yourself. Keller slumped in his chair, his breath ragged. He looked smaller now, the weight of his actions finally crushing him. Maya turned to Price. Let's go. Price nodded, but Keller's voice stopped them at the door. Maya. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Don't do this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only resolve. I already did. She turned and walked out, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the hall like the final strike of a gavel. As she stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't fear this time. It was relief. Price fell into step beside her. You okay? Maya exhaled slowly. Not yet. He glanced at her. But you will be. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. For the first time in days, she could see the end of the road. And Keller? He was already at the edge of his. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Maya and Price in a pocket of silence as they descended toward the lobby. The hum of the elevator filled the space, but neither of them spoke. Maya's arms were crossed tightly, her jaw set. Price glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, but he knew better than to break the silence just yet. When the doors opened, the chatter of officers and staff in the precinct hit them like a wave. Eyes darted toward them, some curious, others cautious. Maya's shoulders squared as she stepped out, her heels clicking against the floor with deliberate weight. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing any hesitation. Not now. Price followed close behind, his presence solid and steady. As they made their way toward the exit, Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, but when it buzzed again, she pulled it out. Her breath caught as she read the message. We need to talk. Now. It was from Keller's lawyer. Price caught the shift in her expression. What is it? Maya handed him the phone, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Price read the text and let out a low whistle. He's already panicking. Good, Maya said, though her voice didn't match the confidence in her words. She stopped just outside the precinct, the heat of the sun hitting her face as she tried to clear her thoughts. But I need to know why. Price studied her carefully. You think he's bluffing? Maya shook her head. No. He wouldn't reach out if he didn't think he had something to bargain with. She shoved her phone back into her pocket. Let's find out what it is. The lawyer's office was a stark contrast to the chaos of the precinct, clean, quiet, and cold. Maya sat across from Gregory Tate, Keller's attorney, who looked every bit as sharp as his tailored suit. Price leaned against the wall, arms crossed, letting Maya take the lead. Tate didn't waste time. He's willing to cooperate, he said, folding his hands on the desk. But he has conditions. Maya's eyebrow arched. Conditions? Tate nodded. He's prepared to expose other officers involved in corruption, names, dates, evidence. But in exchange, he wants reduced charges and protection. Maya's jaw tightened. Protection from who? Tate's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not clear yet. But he's afraid. And given what he knows, I think that fear is justified. Price stepped forward. And why should we believe anything he says? He's been lying for years. Because he knows he's out of options, Tate said, meeting Maya's eyes. And because if something happens to him, that information dies with him. The weight of those words sank in. Maya leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had Keller cornered, but now he was turning the tables, offering her the very thing she'd been after from the beginning. Justice. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had been trampled under the weight of the system Keller had exploited. But it came at a cost. You're asking me to protect the man who assaulted me, Maya said, her voice low and sharp. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture, Tate countered. Price stepped closer. This isn't just about him anymore, he said quietly. It's about everyone he could take down with him. Maya's eyes flicked to Price, searching for reassurance, but she didn't find it. Instead, she saw the same conflict that was churning inside her. Tate leaned forward. You know as well as I do that cases like this don't come around often. You can make this about one man, or you can make it about the entire system. Maya's fingers tapped against the table, the rhythmic sound barely masking the storm brewing in her mind. She hated it, hated the idea of giving Keller anything. But she couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Fine, she said finally. I'll hear what he has to say. The tension in the room broke slightly, but Maya's stomach remained knotted. She stood and turned to Price. Set up the meeting. The interrogation room felt smaller this time, the air heavier. Keller sat across from her, his hands cuffed to the table, but his posture was different, less combative, more resigned. Maya sat down without speaking, letting the silence stretch until Keller finally cracked. I don't want to die, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's eyes locked onto his. Then start talking. Keller exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. There are others. Officers higher up, guys who've been covering for me and plenty of others. Drugs, money, even trafficking. They keep it buried, and when someone gets too close, they make it disappear. Price stood behind Maya, arms crossed tightly. Names. Keller swallowed hard. Detective Walsh. Captain Henley. And there's more. But if I give you everything, I need guarantees. I can't do this without protection. Maya's voice was ice. You should have thought about that before you sold your soul. Keller flinched but pressed on. I'll give you everything. But you need to move fast. If they find out I'm talking, I'm dead. Maya stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She could feel the clock ticking, the urgency pressing against her. Price leaned down, speaking softly in her ear. We don't have to trust him. But we can use him. Maya's eyes never left Keller's. Fine, she said finally. But if you try to play me, I'm not, Keller interrupted. Not anymore. Maya stood abruptly, signaling the end of the meeting. Get me the files, she said to Price as she walked out. We don't stop until we burn this whole thing down. Price followed close behind, his voice low. You really think he's telling the truth? Maya didn't hesitate. I think he's scared enough to be. And as they stepped into the hallway, Maya knew one thing for certain, this wasn't just about Keller anymore. This was about dismantling the system that created him. And that battle was only beginning. The walls of the precinct felt closer now, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like static. Maya sat across from Price in a dimly lit conference room, files spread across the table like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against the edge of the chair as she stared down at the names Keller had given her, names she already knew carried weight. Price leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly. You realize what this means, right? Maya didn't look up. Yeah. No, he said, leaning forward. I mean, really think about it. If these names are legit, we're not just talking about one bad cop anymore. This could blow open the entire department. That's the point. Maya's voice was sharp, but the exhaustion in it was impossible to miss. Price shook his head. You keep talking like this is some simple cleanup. It's not. These people, Walsh, Henley, they're powerful. Connected. You think they're just going to roll over and let us take them down? Maya finally looked up, her eyes hard. I don't care what they let us do. We're doing it anyway. Price held her gaze for a moment before exhaling and leaning back. Then we need leverage. Real leverage. Not just Keller's word. We'll get it, Maya said, her voice steady even though her stomach churned. The door creaked open and Tate stepped inside, his expression tight. He's ready to talk again. But it's worse than we thought. Maya and Price exchanged a look before following Tate down the hallway. Keller was in the same room, but this time, he looked smaller, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting nervously. When Maya entered, he sat up straighter, but the fear still clung to him. "I need to know everything," Maya said as she sat down. "No more games." Keller licked his lips, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. "They're on to me," he said. "I got a call this morning, blocked number. They didn't say much, just enough to let me know they're watching." Maya leaned in. "Who?" "Walsh," Keller said quickly. "And Henley. But there's more. They've got ties to people outside the department. Politicians, even businesses in this city. It's bigger than I realized." Price stepped closer, his voice sharp. "And you just went along with it?" Keller's head snapped up. "You think I had a choice?" "You always had a choice," Maya said, her voice cutting through the room. "You just made the wrong one, over and over again." Keller flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything," he said. "Emails, account transfers, surveillance logs. I started keeping records months ago, just in case." Maya didn't touch it yet. "Why?" Keller's voice cracked. "Because I knew it was only a matter of time before they turned on me too. I've seen what they do to people who step out of line. And you think this erases what you did?" Maya's voice was low, but it carried enough force to make Keller flinch again. "No," Keller said quickly. "But maybe it stops them from doing it to anyone else." Maya stared at him, searching for sincerity, but all she saw was desperation. Still, she took the flash drive and stood. "We'll see." She walked out without another word, Price following close behind. In the hallway, Price finally broke the silence. "You really think this is enough?" Maya turned the drive over in her hand. "It's a start." The next few hours were a blur of data, emails, spreadsheets, hidden accounts. Maya and Price combed through it all, their eyes burning from the screen's glow. Every click uncovered more rot, false reports, planted evidence, payoffs disguised as donations. "This is insane," Price muttered. "They were running this whole place like a damn cartel." Maya didn't respond. She was too focused, too angry. She stopped on a string of emails between Henley and a city councilman, her stomach tightening as the words sank in. "They weren't just covering for Keller," she said. "They were using him. He was disposable, just like the rest of us." Price sat back, rubbing his hands over his face. "So what's the plan? We take this to the DA?" Maya hesitated. "Not yet." Price looked at her. "What do you mean, not yet?" Maya's voice dropped. "We need more. If we go in with this now, we lose the element of surprise. We need them caught in the act." Price's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about baiting them?" "I'm talking about finishing this," Maya said. "The right way." The tension between them lingered before Price finally nodded. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, it won't." Maya's voice left no room for argument. They moved quickly after that. Maya planted the information where she knew it would be found, an anonymous tip sent directly to Henley's office. It didn't take long for the response. The meeting was set for midnight. Maya waited in the shadows of the warehouse parking lot, her heart pounding as headlights swept across the pavement. Price was nearby, hidden but ready, his radio crackling softly in her ear. Henley stepped out of the black SUV first, his polished shoes clicking against the asphalt. Walsh followed, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Where is he?" Henley barked. Maya stepped out, her badge hidden. "He's not coming." Henley's eyes narrowed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." Walsh smirked. "But you're out of your league, sweetheart. Maya's hand hovered near her concealed weapon. Not tonight. Henley stepped closer, his voice low. You think you're going to walk away from this? I don't think so. Maya didn't flinch. Actually, I think you're not walking away from this. The sound of sirens filled the air, flashing lights flooding the lot as officers swarmed in. Henley and Walsh spun, their confidence crumbling as they realized what was happening. Maya stepped back, her heart pounding as Price emerged with a team of agents. Henley's voice cracked. You set us up. Maya's eyes didn't waver. You set yourselves up. And as the cuffs clicked shut around their wrists, Maya finally let herself breathe. It wasn't over yet. But the tide had turned. Maya stood just outside the perimeter of flashing lights, her arms crossed tightly as officers moved around her. The scene buzzed with controlled chaos, radio chatter, the clinking of handcuffs, and the low hum of engines idling. She should have felt relief watching Henley and Walsh being escorted into separate patrol cars, their faces pale and drawn. But the tightness in her chest hadn't eased. Not yet. Price approached, his steps purposeful but slower than usual. He stopped beside her, his eyes scanning the scene before landing on her. It worked, he said, his voice low. Maya didn't answer right away. Her gaze lingered on Henley, who shot her a venomous glare through the window of the patrol car before it pulled away. Did it? She asked finally. Price tilted his head. You don't think it did? Maya's lips pressed together. We got them, 2 of them. But you saw what was on that drive, Price. They weren't acting alone. This goes deeper, and you know it. He let out a sharp breath. Yeah, I know. But this was a start, a big one. We just rattled the entire chain. That's not nothing. Maya turned toward him, her voice quieter now. It's not enough either. Price studied her carefully, reading the exhaustion in her eyes and the tension still humming under her skin. You're not going to let this go, are you? Would you? Maya's question hung between them, heavy and unspoken for a long beat before Price finally shook his head. No, he admitted. I wouldn't. The sound of footsteps behind them made Maya turn. Tate approached, his suit now slightly rumpled and his expression tight. We need to talk, he said, his voice clipped. Maya's eyes narrowed. About what? Tate hesitated. About Keller. Price's jaw tensed. What about him? Tate looked uneasy, shifting his weight. We lost him. Maya's stomach dropped. What do you mean we lost him? He was being transferred to a secure location, but the transport was intercepted. Intercepted? Maya's voice rose, sharp and cutting. By who? Tate shook his head. We don't know yet. But whoever it was, they were organized. The officers in the transport unit didn't stand a chance. Maya took a step closer, her eyes locked on Tate. And no one thought to mention that sooner. We're handling it, Tate said quickly. No, Maya snapped. You're cleaning it up. There's a difference. Price stepped in. We need details. Now. Tate hesitated again, but under their combined stares, he finally caved. We think Henley set it up before the arrest. Keller was leverage, someone to silence if this ever came back on him. Maya's hands clenched into fists. And now he's gone. Tate nodded. For now. Maya turned sharply, pacing as the weight of the situation settled over her. She'd pushed too hard, too fast, and now the cracks in the foundation were showing. This isn't over, she said, her voice low but resolute. Price stepped closer. Then let's make sure we end it. Hours later, Maya stood in her apartment, the dim light from the kitchen barely reaching the living room. The flash drive sat on the coffee table, mocking her with everything it represented: evidence, betrayal, unfinished business. She hadn't been able to sleep, her mind running endless scenarios of what came next. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Maya." It was Keller. His voice was strained, barely above a whisper. Her breath caught. "Where are you?" "I don't know." The panic in his voice was raw. "They moved me. I think they're watching me. I need your help." Maya's heart pounded. "Who's watching you?" "I can't," his voice cut out, static crackling through the line. "Keller." She gripped the phone tighter. "Keller." The line went dead. Maya stood frozen for a moment before her training kicked in. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door, dialing Price as she moved. "Something's wrong," she said the moment he picked up. "What happened?" "Keller called me. He's in trouble." Price didn't hesitate. "Where do we start?" The next few hours blurred together, tracking the call, piecing together Keller's movements, following a trail that felt deliberately fragmented. Maya's pulse never slowed, not even as they closed in on a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building loomed in the dark, its windows boarded up and its walls stained with graffiti. Maya's instincts screamed at her to be careful, but she pushed forward, her gun drawn as Price covered her from behind. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, the faint creak of wood under their feet echoing in the empty space. "Keller." Maya's voice cut through the silence. No answer. They moved deeper into the building, the beam of Maya's flashlight sweeping across broken furniture and debris. Then she saw it, a shadow shifting in the corner. "Keller," she called again, stepping closer. He emerged slowly, his face pale and his hands trembling. "They're coming," he said, his voice barely audible. Maya didn't have time to ask questions. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Price moved first, positioning himself near the entrance. "We need to move. Now." Keller stumbled toward them, but Maya grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Stay close," she ordered. They barely made it outside before headlights flooded the lot, and Maya's instincts kicked into overdrive. She shoved Keller toward Price. "Get him out of here." "What about you?" Price demanded. "I'll cover you. Go." Price hesitated for only a second before dragging Keller toward the car. Maya turned, her gun raised as figures emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes sharp against the blinding lights. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her hands were steady. She wasn't going to let them win. Not now. The first shot rang out, shattering the night. Maya dropped behind cover, her mind racing. She'd come too far to let this end here. But even as she fired back, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The sun was already rising by the time Maya stepped out of the precinct. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair slightly disheveled, but her posture remained unshaken. She stood at the edge of the parking lot, breathing in the crisp morning air as the weight of the last few days began to lift. The sound of footsteps behind her made her glance over her shoulder. Price was there, his shirt untucked and sleeves rolled up. "They're in custody," he said. "All of them?" Maya nodded, her shoulders loosening slightly. "Keller?" "Witness protection," Price replied. "He gave us everything. Henley, Walsh, and their entire network. It's enough to bury them for good." Maya exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. She'd imagined this moment countless times, the arrests, the headlines, the fallout. But now that it was here, it felt different. Not triumphant, but heavy, as if the weight of what they'd uncovered still lingered. "He'll be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life," Maya said, more to herself than to Price. Price stepped closer, his voice quieter. "But he's alive. And so are you." Maya turned to face him, searching his expression. "You think we did enough?" Price's lips pressed into a thin line. "We did what we could. The rest? That's out of our hands. Maya looked back at the horizon, the sky shifting from gray to pale orange. I'm not sure that's enough for me. It's going to have to be, Price said. For now. They stood there in silence, the hum of the city waking up around them. Maya wasn't sure what came next, whether the department would collapse under the weight of its own corruption or whether more would step forward, emboldened by what she and Price had started. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done fighting. Later that afternoon, Maya sat across from Keller one last time. He looked different now, smaller, worn down. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that almost resembled shame. They're going to come after me, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Maya met his eyes. Probably. He swallowed hard. And you're okay with that? No, Maya said honestly. But I can live with it. Keller let out a bitter laugh. You're lucky, you know. You get to walk away from this with your head held high. Maya leaned forward. Do I? Do you have any idea what it's like to live with the weight of every decision you make? To know that one mistake could cost you everything? Keller's eyes dropped. That's the difference between us, Maya continued. I know what it feels like to carry that weight. And I never ran from it. Keller nodded slowly, but there was no fight left in him. I hope this was worth it for you. Maya stood, her voice calm but firm. It was. She left him there, surrounded by security, and stepped back into the sunlight. She wasn't looking back. Not this time. 2 weeks later, the headlines broke. Henley, Walsh, and a dozen other officers were indicted on charges ranging from corruption to conspiracy. Protests erupted outside the precinct, calls for reform echoing through the city. Maya watched from a distance, knowing this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. But for now, she'd done her part. Price met her outside the courthouse, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you could use this, he said, handing one to her. Maya smirked. You think coffee fixes everything? It's a start. They stood there together, watching as cameras flashed and reporters swarmed the steps of the courthouse. You think it's over? Price asked. Maya took a sip of her coffee, letting the warmth settle in her chest. No, she said quietly. But it's a hell of a beginning. As the scene unfolded before them, Maya allowed herself to breathe, knowing that her fight for justice hadn't ended, it had only just begun. Reflection: this story isn't just about corruption or revenge. It's about accountability. It's about standing up even when the odds feel insurmountable. Maya's journey shows us the power of resilience and the importance of refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice. How many times do we witness unfairness and choose to look the other way? How often do we feel powerless, thinking one voice can't make a difference? This story reminds us that one voice, when firm and unwavering, can spark change. Now it's your turn to reflect. What would you have done in Maya's position? Would you have taken the risks she did to uncover the truth? Or would fear have kept you silent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How did this story resonate with you? And if you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, make sure to subscribe to Tales of Twist and hit that like button to support more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next twist.